Welcome to the Unraveling Shaltazar podcast. Welcome, Jeffrey, to this last week of 2020. How are you today?
Wow-wee. All right. Are we gonna have a party for 2020 today?
I don't think so. I don't think 2020 deserves a party. I was reading one of my favorite writers, humorous writers, is Dave Barry, and he writes a year in review every year. And I was reading through his article before we talked. I don't know if I can see it here. What did he say? He said, "We're trying to think of something nice to say about 2020. Okay, here goes. Nobody got killed by the murder hornets, as far as we know." So that's his take on 2020.
Well, it's kind of interesting. It's kind of interesting that's a great perspective, because you let me know what we're going to be talking about today, and maybe how we look at 2020 is going to have some relevance in our discussion.
Sure, right. It could. So the message that I chose to talk about today is it's a live Shaltazar channeling event from 2015, I believe, and it's called "Letting Go of Your Personal History." And as you know, I've been working through some issues with respect to my personal history. And so I think that's probably what attracted me to this message. And there's a couple pieces of it that I was hoping you could cover. One of them is the idea that by achieving inner harmony, individual inner harmony, how we are also impacting the collective, because it talks about that in this message. And then also the bigger part of it, I think, is the idea that and I think a lot of us do this, where we latch on to past experiences, especially traumatic experiences in our past, and we keep allowing those experiences to inform our future and where we're going. So we can't do this in the future because this happened to us in the past, and that seems to be kind of an overriding theme in this message. And so, maybe we can start there and kind of see where that takes us.
Great. Yeah, I do like that idea of the inner harmony and the outer harmony, but there was a little bit of a letdown when you said that, because I think the greater power in this message is that one about personal history and changing the perspective on that, and I think you have to do that first. So if you don't mind, we'll sort of switch the order of how we handle these. I think unless we are willing to look at our personal history in a different way, we'll never get to that inner harmony. And that's where I said it's kind of interesting. We're talking about this being the last recording in this series of 2020. 2020 has been a very traumatic year for a lot of people, certainly even for the collective consciousness. And if we do not look at that history in a different light, then I think that 2021 may not be the hopeful year that we would like it to be. And so there's a great opportunity, and you and I have talked about in one of the other episodes about my pet peeve of New Year's resolutions, and not to be focusing as much on the resolution as much as looking in the rear view mirror and learn and focus more on the learning and growth. And so I think it's important to look at the learning and growth of 2020. I think it's important to look at the learning and growth of our emotional traumas that we've had in our personal history. I think that is really the heart of this message. I will say that my ego kicked in a little bit when I listened to this, because, as you said, it was a live channeling, and I was embarrassed at the quality of the sound. And I had to get over myself and say, focus on the message and not the quality of the audio. So thank you for choosing that and making me listen to it and wiggling a little bit, saying, oh, should I re-record it? It was terrible audio, and realizing, of course, that was just a little bit of ego that needed to be let go from my personal history. So I really believe what Shaltazar was saying is that it's important for us to take a different perspective on our emotional traumas. I believe from a spiritual perspective, emotional traumas is part of what we incarnate to experience in our lives. I very rarely find people who the beginning of their life, their personal history is all amazing. It's interesting. I've had some clients and they start off by saying, oh, I had such a supportive parents, and it's like, oh, that's kind of interesting. To myself, I'm saying, you're the first person I've ever met that didn't have any emotional trauma. And 5 minutes later, they spill the beans, and it's like, well, it wasn't quite as rosy as we thought. I believe one of the big purposes of human life is to experience the personal trauma, the personal history trauma, and to be given an opportunity to shift it. So right. I think if we can look at all of the stuff that we experience as an opportunity to allow consciousness to expand, it sort of helps us and takes the pressure off. So I think that that's really, really important to realize that this is an opportunity. And then the other thing that I'll say before I give you a chance to comment is it takes a lot of energy to take what has been conditioned in our beingness in those early years in that personal history and to reverse it. They say it takes 21 days to create a new habit. Well, I would think in some cases it may take 21 years to change the first 21 years of our life. And so there is a lot of energy required in shifting away from the trauma, reinterpreting it, looking at it from a different perspective. I think it's really, really important to be able to reinterpret that personal history in a different light. Does any of that make sense, Mark?
Sure. Oh yeah, it makes a lot of sense. I think that probably, just in my opinion, and I'm curious if you agree, that one of the biggest impediments to personal growth is this latching on that we tend to do to these past traumatic experiences and never move beyond them. It's that old adage, you fall off your bike. Well, the best medicine is to get back on and ride it again, right? And I think a lot of people, I don't know if they fall off the first time and don't get back on, but maybe the second time and they just push the bike in the corner and say, oh, forget it. This bike is dangerous. It's going to hurt me. And so that kind of informs their whole future in a lot of ways.
Yeah, that's interesting you say that, because my wife is a very amazing person. She can remember what I did 20 years ago and bring it up to me, and has this interesting knack of believing that which has occurred will reoccur and reoccur and reoccur. And I'm kind of fortunate because I'm able to forget a lot of personal history. I don't remember much about when I was a kid, and I think that's a real gift. And so whether you have the ability to let go of the past like I do, or whether it haunts you like it does for my wife, I think there's a great opportunity to shift that. And the way to do so is realize that it is the linearity of the mind. It is the obsessiveness of the mind that makes you believe that history repeats itself. So I think the first thing we want to be able to do is realize that no matter how well we think we can predict the future, we can't. And the future does not always get repeated from the past. And I think it's important to start by looking at some things in your life and realize that when you do the same thing over and over again, it always doesn't get you the same result.
Sure.
Okay. You went to the casino and you always put, at the roulette table, you always use 9 black. There's a good chance that 9 black sometimes might win and sometimes will lose. And so I think we have to deprogram the mind from that obsessive, repetitive thought that history always repeats itself.
Sure. Well, and the other part of that, you said that instead of looking at history as a wound or a trauma, looking at it as an opportunity for learning and growth. And I think if you make that change in how you approach it or how you perceive it, that also helps kind of reframe those experiences as something perhaps even positive, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, kind of interesting. Think about school, the education system. So you get a math question. As we advance into high school math, I remember the algebra and the calculus, and if you try to solve that problem and you get it wrong, and then you keep using the same methodology over and over again, there's a chance you'll get it wrong. And those that figure out that I can do this problem a different way, if I look at the methodology I used and change it, then maybe I can get the right answer. And so if we look at life as a math problem, if you keep adding up the numbers and you keep getting a number you're not happy with, then you better figure out a different formula to use. And so I think that's really, really important. Looking at life as a math problem to be solved, as an opportunity to change. I think that's the big shift, is if you look at your personal history, and I think we're having this conversation because you just went through an issue where your issues, your challenges in the past with regard to health and well-being were challenged. If you keep looking at them the way you did in the past, you noticed your experiences weren't very pleasant. Right.
Yeah, and it in order to move forward, you have to. I'm not even saying that the behaviors are wrong. I'm saying that the way you consider them can be different. It doesn't have to be. What am I trying to say? You know what I'm trying to say better than what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, because it's the perspective. It's not the actions. For example, let's share with the listeners. You just went through some COVID in your house where your wife came down with it and your girls came down with it, and so far you haven't, which is extremely surprising because your personal history would have led you to believe that you're the first one that would have had it, and you would have had a severe case of it. Is that correct?
Right. Correct. Exactly. Right.
Okay. Right. And so far, 3 people in your family have it, and you don't. And so you have just changed history, haven't you?
I guess I have. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But if when this is all over and next year instead of COVID we have a flu season, will you be any different with regard to being concerned about germs and washing your hands and spraying lots of Lysol? Maybe, maybe not, which is kind of interesting. So for whatever reason, it's as if some of these past personal experiences become an anchor. And if we don't pull that anchor out, if we don't reshape that anchor, it stays there. I believe it was Greg Braden or Bruce Lipton that talked about the unconscious is like a tape recorder, and it just keeps recording. And unless we do a do-over, unless we do a voiceover, then that unconscious is going to feed us the same information over and over again. Right? I mean, one of the big ones that most people get fed is I'm not good enough. Right? We learn that early in life. And so it's so easy to have something occur and bingo, the tape recorder says, oh, there it is, Jeffrey, you're not good enough. And you just keep hearing that over and over again. and your reaction to it is based on, I'm not good enough. And so we have to really go back into the tape recorder. We have to go back into the personal history and just about rewrite it. And that brings up an interesting story. I remember when I was early in my journey of self-discovery, I was reading a book, and I can't even remember the book, but I remember the concept because I thought it was fascinating. And this guy talked about the fact that if you burned your hand on the stove, that you could go back and replay that experience in your mind, and that could heal the burn. And it's like, wow, that's kind of fascinating, right? And I remember a while later, I was at a workshop with Denise Lynn, and she was doing past life experiences. And she took us into a deep trance where I went into a past life experience, and she asked you to just recall something that is occurring in this lifetime, and just go back into this past life regression with the intention that you're going to switch it. And I remember going back into old England, and I was a young kid, and I remember the image of walking down a cobblestone street with a peg leg. And then she walked us through reliving that past life experience. And I remember having this sore on my leg, and the doctor said, there's no choice, we have to cut it off at the knee. And I remember in my fantasy of this reliving of the past life experience, there was this lovely white-haired healer that came in out of nowhere and said, no, you don't have to cut off the leg, let him come with me. And he took me out into the forest, and he put on poultices, and he put on herbs. And I remember that by the time it was over, I was walking. I never lost the leg. I didn't have it amputated. Now, the fascinating part of this story is that at that time in my life, I used to get massages on a regular basis. And I remember going to this one massage therapist. He was a great guy. And he always said that on my left leg, I had a real tight IT band, that the muscle on my leg between my knee and my thigh was always really, really tight. And he would always massage it, and it would hurt. I remember after this experience, after this past life regression, and of course in my past life regression, the leg that was cut off was my left leg. I remember the massage after this past life regression, he commented how loose my IT band seemed. It seemed to be so much looser than it was in previous massages.
Amazing.
So, sorry to take so long for that story. I believe that we can change history. And if we keep reliving our personal history, we are repeating it over and over again. And if you go back and you reinterpret and you tell a different story, even though the facts may remain the same, your interpretation of them can release you from your past life, or your personal history, rather, your personal history trauma. And so I think what Shaltazar is saying in this message is, if you want that inner calm, you pretty well have to do an inventory of all of your traumas, all of your emotional and mental traumas that you had growing up. And you have to be able to rewrite that history, just like I did with that past life regression. And by doing so, you will release that trauma, and you will be able to have a greater inner calm.
Fascinating. Wow, that was a kind of a really easy to understand explanation of quantum theory. The idea that you can rewrite the past in the future. I'm not sure I said that properly, but that's
right.
I think that's the idea, right?
Absolutely. So let me ask you, any hang-ups that you have, any issues that you have, about illness and about issues around health and wealth, because I think when you were going through this COVID thing, those were the two that came up. Mm-hmm. What could you do to go back into your personal history where you notice the beginnings of that trauma with regard to health and wealth, and how you could rewrite that story. You're a storyteller, you're a writer. What would it be like if you rewrote that personal history? If you took the parts of your life that were the most traumatic and you rewrote it as if you were a screenwriter.
Yeah. You write different outcomes, right? And different points of, it would achieve a different point of view of the situation.
Right. So it's interesting that Shaltazar message that had one of the poorest audio qualities is such a powerful message, and I think that's where I have to rewrite my ego and my perfectionism and realize that it wasn't the quality of the audio, it was the quality of the message. And I highly recommend to listeners to go back into your personal history, find the trauma, and rewrite it. Change the perspective, look at it from the perspective of learning and growth, and let it go so it doesn't keep hounding you for years and years to come.
Great advice. Yeah, that's kind of what I got out of this message also, and I think that's sound advice for anybody, because I think everybody has some of those issues, some of those traumatic experiences that could use healing like this. So thank you very much.
Thanks for choosing that message, and thanks for doing these with me. Let us set the intention that in 2021 we'll keep doing them and keep having fun, and hopefully the listeners will enjoy them as well.
That sounds like a great plan. I'm on board.
Excellent. Thanks, Mark. Take care.
Yeah, thank you, Jeffrey. Take care. If you have any questions about the Master Teachings of Shaltazar, we invite you to submit them to Jeffrey@jeffreyeisen.com, and we will make your question the topic of a future episode.